So, hello and welcome everybody to another Sacred Wisdom podcast. In this podcast today, we are going to talk about the White Cities of Tartaria and the way they used the buildings and this energy that was used in their civilizations to use to enhance the Christ consciousness. Now, by Christ consciousness, I don't mean Christ as in Christ on a cross. These are symbols that have happened over time in society. But what I mean is about the higher consciousness that we can all reach, these higher states of being that we can reach to, maybe in an astral form, but actually where the Christ consciousness puts this forward in a physical form, so we can reach these higher states of consciousness. And I am joined with the amazing Stephen Denman today, again, to talk about these incredible subjects with this man of knowledge who has articulates it so well. So how are you doing, Steve?
I'm doing very well, and I hope it was good with you, Zach.
Very good, my brother. Thank you very much. So first of all, let's talk about how the Tartarian civilizations encompassed this Christ consciousness.
Well, you've already touched on the white cities of Tartaria, and we know that the polychromatic white light of the Christ consciousness or the higher consciousness, which represents the unification of all the different colors or tinges or hues combined to create this sense of the white luminescence, the white light, was embodied and represented in the white cities of Tartaria, and therefore across Great Tartaria, northern Russia, and all the colonies that Tartaria literally managed all over planet Earth. Now, obviously, a lot of the buildings were not rendered with a fine plaster coating and then were, painted with this beautiful white luminescent coatings. But a lot of them were, and they represented the embodiment in a corporeal form in the structures of those buildings that became integral to the expansion and the development of the Christ consciousness amongst the Nordic Tartarians as residents in the towns and cities of Great Tartaria and what has become known as the White Cities. So these were designed architecturally to obviously draw down, as we've discussed many occasions, the telluric electricity into ground and basement level electrical capacitors. But that was only one aspect. So the Christ consciousness or the higher consciousness was really integrally seen as very much linked to Tartarian architecture, not just obviously therefore inside the stately homes, the mansions, the healing temples of their spires and steeples, but also to do with the external architectural features of the various buildings in the white cities of Great Tartaria. So the Christ consciousness was seen as a multifaceted religious, spiritual, and practical approach to the lifestyles that were seen to be of such imperative truthfulness to the ordinary citizens of Great Tartaria and northern Russia, because they saw the importance of each soul personality. Each individual was seen as equal to another, simply different, but equal. And that the Christ consciousness was the most perfect way, both in the buildings as the white cities of Great Tartaria and within the subconscious and conscious minds of the Nordic Tartarians themselves, as being the only method on a societal level to create ongoing unification, harmony, and bliss amongst families, amongst children, and and how to always use that kind of cognitive approach when it came to applicating their usage of their own types of occult technology.
So when they were kind of attuning to this Christ consciousness, do you feel that it was always like they were going to an astral state, or was it a form like of a meditation, a rejuvenation of the body, the physical body, their communities? I mean, how was this Christ consciousness interacting with people? Also, as well, give a little summary of what actually your perspective on Christ consciousness is as well.
Okay, well, I'll start with what my perception of the Christ consciousness or the higher consciousness is. Now, aside from, the teachings of Yeshua ben Yosef, the Lord Jesus Christ, in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, in the New Testament of the Holy Bible, that's one aspect. As I've said many times before, and as you've also reiterated before, we know that the Christ consciousness is a universal belief structure or belief system. We know that in my mind, and this is what I believe to be the truth, as many others do, we know that the Christ consciousness or higher consciousness is actually taught on literally billions upon billions, if not trillions upon trillions of planets and moons across various galaxies within this physical universe. So you will get on each one of these planets when the time is ready in terms of spiritual or supernal resonance, the incarnation of a being that is completely self-realized in their embodiment and their relationship with the eternal mind of the universal creator. And they are there in a corporeal form, the soul personality contained within that biological form, to convey those spiritual teachings, to spiritually therefore upgrade
Evolve.
the human consciousness in the sense of being here on Earth, or whatever the type of consciousness is on other planets and moons across this physical universe. But ultimately, what it's about is maintaining an understanding through sensing and feeling that divine love, showing empathy, showing compassion, creating a unity, creating inclusion, especially amongst the more vulnerable members of any societal structure or any kinds of communities. And that's how I see the Christ consciousness, that nobody is apart from that Christ consciousness or higher consciousness. And every individual, whether they're a Homo sapien or human being or some type of ultra-terrestrial or extraterrestrial somewhere else in this physical universe.
You've answered my question. That was going to be my next question. Do other beings encompass Christ consciousness? But of course, yes. So where does the word Christ come from? Just summarize that to people, because I found that interesting when you told me that.
Well, as I said before, the word Christ comes, we're told from the Greek language, from the word Christos, to mean anointed. But what we know is it's got a far older meaning in the Irish Gaelic, going back to the time of the Irish Druids and the British Druids, when the actual word comes from the Irish Gaelic root, meaning Christos, meaning shining spirit. So
Wow.
it's quite a profound word.
Interesting.
It is
Wow.
indeed, yeah.
So, talking what I said before, so like how were they embodying the Christ consciousness? Was it through meditation or just rejuvenation of the bodies, or were they going into astral forms? Talk about that.
Well, we know from what we've discussed on quite a few previous occasions, in the healing temples, they had large tuning forks. They would be used in conjunction with the multicolored stained glass windows to create different wavelengths of photonic resonance, combined with the acoustic waves or wave forms coming from these tuning forks. We have obviously the large metallic organs in these healing temples across Great Tartaria, northern Russia, as with elsewhere. In many of these buildings that were firstly known as healing temples, that were then obviously, shall we say, repurposed into becoming chapels, churches, and cathedrals, obviously at later dates, were combined so that all these different sounds, the acoustic interplay with the luminescence from the various colored wavelengths of light coming through the stained glass windows, combined with this singing, the choral patterns of voices that were in harmony together, both adult and child, in the congregations or the laity that were in attendance in these healing temples in Great Tartaria, northern Russia, would create a sense of ambience. You could say it was almost a trance-like state. I'd say some of the individuals went into deep meditation whilst they were seated in such buildings. Others perhaps were far more still conscious of themselves. They hadn't gone into such trance-like meditative type states. And that's what I believe was taking place. I believe prayer work was very important in terms of showing gratitude, appreciation, and a thankfulness towards the eternal mind of the universal creator. And it's interesting to note in Great Tartaria in northern Russia, they didn't perceive, as we obviously see with Christianity and the Roman Catholic Church, that they're just one individual comes in as an incarnation to literally spiritually improve and upgrade the development of the human consciousness that's on this planet. They saw it in an immediate state, literally, of apparency, where every man, woman, and child, is inhabitants of Great Tartaria in northern Russia, across the white cities and elsewhere, many of the colonies, could actually achieve that Christ consciousness or higher consciousness. Now, that would therefore lead to the, shall we say, the speculation that it does demonstrate that these Nordic Tartarians were already spiritually far more advanced than many other Homo sapiens or human beings across planet Earth. And I think this is why their civilization, not just because of the advanced, occult technology they had, but also their predilection towards constantly, and persistently focusing on their own spiritual development through using the Christ consciousness or higher consciousness in their own landmass. I think that's very important to note.
Now, obviously, this is no way of actually purely documenting this, but
No.
is there any record of anybody that's had any accounts where they were embodied in this Christ consciousness or in the previous history? There, I mean, obviously, we got the monks, Tibetan monks, and that kind of them cultures around in the East that reflect that kind of beauty. But like, what? Well, yeah, I'm just interested to know if there have been any accounts, if you can think of any.
No, I mean you can look at aspects of Vedic Hinduism, especially in places like northern India. But when it comes to Tibetan Buddhism and even Tibetan Bonpo shamanism, you had obviously different Tibetan pantheons of different astral deities, that exist within the fourth dimension, but they weren't really focused in helping or assisting ordinary citizens across Tibet in developing any sense of the Christ consciousness or higher consciousness. Although you can define the sense of enlightenment, as being a type of Christ consciousness or higher consciousness, the idea of adorating or exemplifying the beauty and the majestic wonders of the eternal mind of the universal creator were not given any emphasis and still aren't within that type of religion. Whereas what was going on in Great Tartaria was a complete overall embodiment on many different levels, spiritual and corporeal, of the Christ consciousness or this higher consciousness in the white cities of Tartaria, integrating that consistently religiously and spiritually with the uses of telluric electricity, being absorbed into the ground floor and basement electrical capacities in their various palaces, stately homes, healing temples, and other residencies on a smaller scale. So we do know that that is another reason why Tartaria really is very unique in terms of how we create a comparison on a historical timeline with other civilizations.
So an interesting thing is obviously if this Christ consciousness embodies into other beings on other planetary systems, and these beings can fly around in amazing aircrafts and stuff like this, they obviously know about advanced technology. So surely they would understand or have a concept of evolution and understand that this Christ consciousness is very powerful and very unique and actually could actually be a benefit to them. But it seems to me that some beings seem to oppose this Christ consciousness, like it's almost could embody them, that they have to almost live in this material world. And I
That's right.
find that very interesting how
That's
advanced
part of
beings.
their development. So you have negatively based ultra terrestrials and extraterrestrials. One group obviously are known as the Rigelian Greys or the Orion Greys. Sometimes they're called the Tall Greys. Obviously, many people have heard of the Zeta Reticulan type A greys and the Zeta Reticulan type B greys. These are known as also the short greys that are connected to alien abduction experiences that have become so prevalent in the past across the United States of America and Canada, as an example.
So are they wanting to kind of like take control of that physical reality? Is that what it is? Or are they wanting to play God? What is their purpose? Because they can't oppose that Christ consciousness, that embodied God consciousness, if you like. You can't disrupt that. That will always have its own direction and will always grow and develop. So it seems to me that they're always going to be hitting against a brick wall eventually. They're never actually going to reach that, that higher state of being.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at you look at the work of Dr. John Mack, you look at the alien abduction experiences of Whitley Strieber and many other individuals concerning these Zeta Reticulan type A greys, Zeta Reticulan type B greys, they seem to serve a much more long-term, multi-dimensional purpose. And I do believe that they are actually connected in some way to the Christ consciousness or the higher consciousness. They are the ultimate resistors, for want of a better phrase, or they're in a state of consistent ultimate resistance against the Christ consciousness or the higher consciousness, just as the Rigelian greys, or these Orion greys, sometimes called the tall greys, that come from the planet Greater, which orbits Rigel A in the Orion constellation, have always in the past looked with great scrutiny at the civilization of Great Tartaria in northern Russia, because it was seen as the pinnacle civilization where there was such an exemplification of the Christ consciousness or the higher consciousness, where the soul personality of each Nordic Tartarian was seen as so important, the integrity and the preservation of their own morals, their own ethics, and the need for family unity, and communities and societies being constantly unified through the polychromatic white light of the Christ consciousness or higher consciousness, and represented obviously in the machines of Tartaria, these incredibly architecturally intricate white cities that they had constructed with such adoration, such determination, such stamina, and such fascination. So there's obviously, you can see the polarization of these negatively based ultra terrestrials or extraterrestrials do serve a purpose. They create a dimensional contrast on a very intense energetic level against the positively based, ultra terrestrials or extraterrestrials, some of which we know contactees have communicated both psychically or telepathically with, such as the Pleiadian Aryans, for example.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Do you think, like, these white cities, let's get back to the white cities and the Christ consciousness, the actual buildings, whether every part of the building was built to elevate that consciousness, right?
Yes, to elevate, to exemplify in a very solidified, constructed form that was very fixated, because that's obviously what buildings are, with deep, deep foundations and very intricate architectural features, or, ornamentation and fenestration, beautiful apexes and roof lines, and the uses of maybe different types of gold and silver plated statues and so forth, really to enhance the eloquence and beauty of the Christ consciousness or the higher consciousness in a very solidified corporeal form within the 3D holographic reality of this material dimension that these Nordic Tartarians accepted they had incarnated into. But deep down, each of them, as a soul personality, knew their civilization was really there for the embetterment of their own spiritual development. That was their collective priority. And that's why they didn't put this emphasis on needing to bring in, I suppose, some sort of intricate monetary based or financial systems, like a third-party debt usury system with coinage and notage. As we've discussed before, how electricity became something that was seen as a privilege and a commodity that the corporations or large utilities companies could then roll out and charge on a tariff or a rate, the general public for the usage of. That wasn't seen as relevant, because that would be, in a way, consuming many of the thoughts and the emotions in that sense of human beings, because it's diverting away from the much higher purpose, in the sense of the Christ consciousness and higher consciousness, therefore, of their own spiritual development. That was consistently seen as the only priority that they needed to focus on in their daily lives. That also connected, for the Nordic Tartarians, to their various types of employment. So their vocations, what they wanted to do, was fully a part of the attunement into this Christ consciousness or higher consciousness in the white cities of Tartaria. So they weren't, in employment in job roles where they felt rather unhappy. Those vocations or forms of employment were fully suited on a resonant level to their own auras, to their own thought patterns, to their own upbringing. So that it's a completely different type of civilization that existed, one which was seen by policymakers and rulers, we can call the elites for want of a better phrase, and secret societies, did not particularly want to continue to exist in northern Russia and obviously across its colonies around planet Earth, because again, we have to look at maybe the dimensional aspects of what maybe was controlling and influencing the more negatively based rulers on planet Earth, at the time when the destruction took place that led to the ultimate demise of Great Tartaria.
So do you think the Tartarians were aware of the Akashic records and understood their soul development, their soul journeys? Do you think they actually maybe even had a record of their previous lives? Maybe, I
We
don't know.
don't, we don't, we don't have any. Again, that would be open to sheer
Speculation, of
speculation.
course.
But logic would dictate that any society that uses any advanced form or, of occult technology and
Mm,
has that level of self-awareness that and such incredible integrity is given to the development of each soul personality, and that's seen as the priority. The fact that so much of the Tartarian architecture was based on promoting and exemplifying the polychromatic white light of the Christ consciousness or higher consciousness.
mm,
And obviously the numerous kinds of healing temples were constructed all across northern Russia,
yeah.
for the biological and corporeal restoration on a medical and energetic level of the citizens living in those vast white cities, would therefore lend one to believe that there must have been some much more profound spiritual awareness of the etheric records. And the
Mm,
word akasha obviously means ether in the Sanskrit language.
mm.
So yes, logic would dictate that they probably did have some more profound discernment concerning the etheric records and the purpose of their own incarnations as Nordic Tartarians in Great Tartaria.
Yeah, just so people understand, the Akashic records is when after you die, you reach a point where there is a book of lives. Okay, that's a simple way of putting it. And this book of life, that's what I'm interested with the Akashic records. So these white cities, so how were they, just because they were white, how were they pulling in the energy? Like, was it through the aerials and through the capacity, through the buildings themselves?
Of
Or
course.
what was going on there? Like, I'm just interested to know,
Well,
why
some
was
of the
it
buildings
white,
were
for example?
some of the buildings were obviously constructed of solid white stone. Others had microcrystalline white painted coatings that were placed on them that created, again, small piezoelectric effects that helped to create a directed flow of the telluric electricity through the ornamentation and the fenestration of these buildings into metal strips that were running down the outsides and insides of these various stately homes, palaces, and healing temples that were part of the white cities of Great Tartaria. And obviously that would then be used as in terms of an energetic process to create a further electromagnetic ambience within these urban areas that would help and encourage and maintain a sense of psychological and emotional stability and calmness amongst the citizens of that civilization.
So this Christ consciousness is a frequency. That's what we're getting to,
Yeah.
isn't it? We're understanding that this energy, this electricity, and obviously it's a completely different form of electric, it's flowing through this frequency. And we
Yes.
can, how we're going to tap into that, because we are going to get there one day.
Well,
But
it's
how
like
we're going to, how that's what I'm trying to get to, is like understand that
yeah,
mentally.
yeah.
Maybe it's a mental state that we all have to kind of open up to collectively. Maybe it's,
Well, you look at so many of the spiritual teachers that have promoted the Christ consciousness or the higher consciousness, such as Paramhansa Yogananda is one example, and there's many others. What we're looking at is an electromagnetic spectrum that is used by physicists. It's taught in schools, colleges, and universities. So you have obviously the visible light spectrum, then you've got obviously the infrared, the X-rays, the gamma rays, and so forth. So the
yeah,
Christ consciousness or the higher consciousness is literally a frequency range
well,
that
one of them. Mm,
is oscillating at such a fast rate or a super fast rate
mm.
that it takes a lot of self practice through meditation, perhaps fasting and prayer work and detoxification of any individual over many years to attain a deeper and more profound understanding of the Christ consciousness or the higher consciousness. Now, somebody like Yeshua ben Yosef or the Lord Jesus Christ, he incarnated as literally a Christ being, a higher being on a soul personality level in human form, where he was fully self-realized as literally a God man on planet Earth.
Mm.
So he didn't he came here as that individual to try and spiritually upgrade and release Homo sapiens or human beings from their own transgressions, their own mental blockages, their own inhibitions, their own issues, and to make people realize on a spiritual level that really, all of us are beings of light, we're beings of love,
Mm.
And what we're here to do is really spiritually develop and maintain the integrity of our own soul personalities while we stay in a corporeal form here on planet Earth.
Mm. Giving us the tools to understand this, and you know, we've always lived in a dark and light physical world, so there has always been these dark elements around. This was
Of
obviously
course.
to
Yeah.
help us and assist us,
Yes.
and for us to understand. I think one of the main reasons why we are here on the planet is to understand energy and really understand and how we interact with that energy. And now money's become a form of energy, but it's an artificial form of energy. And I think these Christ consciousness, that type of frequency, that energy is what we have to get into. And we have to really understand that. And I do believe that is part of the journey that we're doing, looking at all this information, is kind of uncovering all this. But Steve, has there been any individuals over the time on
Oh,
planet
yes.
Earth that have basically, discussed this and actually put this in? Besides, obviously, Christ, Jesus Christ himself.
Mhm.
Like, have we had any, inventors or physical people that have brought this to the public?
Yeah, some of the individuals that we would class as experiencing Christ consciousness or the divine love of the universal creator have always been seen with some controversy.
Mm.
So many people have heard of Grigory Yefimovich Rasputin. He was a profound Russian mystic and Russian Orthodox priest. And he had connections that were very questionable, shall we say, to the Russian royal family, to Nikolai Alexandrovich Romanov or Tsar Nicholas II in Imperial Russia. He was known to be a sexual deviant. He had many other failings and issues and problems, but he was also very psychic and had some very unusual mystical experiences in terms of understanding or discerning the divine love of the universal creator. So he was a more controversial individual. Obviously, many people will have heard of the Russian mystic and occultist known as Yelena Petrovna von Hahn, better known as Helena Petrovna Blavatsky or Madame Blavatsky, the co-founder of the Theosophical Society, who experienced an understanding of the Christ consciousness or higher consciousness. And she set up the Theosophical Society in New York City in the eastern United States on the 17th of November, 1875, with Colonel Henry Steele Olcott, William Kwan Judge, and 16 other unique Western occultists. Now, we can come on to individuals like Carl Gustav Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst. He had many profound experiences of divine love, but he didn't define it as divine love. It was a sense of self-realization. But ultimately, self-realization at the pinnacle of spiritual development is the Christ consciousness or the higher consciousness when you're a corporeal incarnation here living on planet Earth. And another individual who was very similar to him.
Sorry, Steve, just
Yeah.
before you go on to that individual. So amazing, Carl Gustav Jung, particularly because what he was getting at, he was quite advanced in his way of thinking, and
That's
obviously
right.
he had the battle with Freud, and Freud sort of took the view of psychology in our society. So again, Jung, what was his kind of connection? Because he's a very interesting guy.
But what we know with Carl Gustav Jung is that he expressed in very cognitive and intellectual terms the Christ consciousness or the higher consciousness through understanding self-realization, the path of actualization, individuation, the use of archetypes. So he had a very
Man and
logical,
his symbols, yeah.
cognitive, and academic approach to understanding the Christ consciousness or the higher consciousness. And I've always found Carl Gustav Jung to be profoundly spiritual. I think he was one of the greatest human beings that has ever lived on planet Earth. I really think he was incredible. So much of what he wrote about, he was a prolific writer on psychiatry and psychotherapy and psychoanalysis. He's just an absolute genius level individual with so much profound knowledge and understanding of the human mind. And another individual who was quite similar to him was the medical doctor and psychotherapist from Rudolfsheim in the district of Vienna in Eastern Austria, known as Alfred Gisselbert Adler. And he really didn't go into really focusing on the Freudian school of psychoanalysis, just as Carl Gustav Jung did not. And he also had some very unusual experiences that can be classed as divine love or some type of self-realization of his own spiritual identity. So Alfred Gisselbert Adler is another individual who was very unique, very profound. It's interesting, he's from Austria, just as Victor Schauberger came from
Yeah.
Austria as well. Individuals who were quite profound as incarnations seem to have come from Austria and that
Mm.
part of Central Europe.
The white cities that were all over the world, right? We had white cities in India, white cities in South America, North America,
Everywhere. Yeah.
Canada, Europe. I mean, and would you think these were built at the same time period?
No,
Or
I mean they were all built over many generations. I mean, as I've already mentioned, we know that Great Tartaria had existed for many centuries. It had been a very long term, very progressive, spiritually based civilization that, as we're discussing now, really was focused only on the Christ consciousness or higher consciousness, combined with the use of integrated and fully compatible types of occult technology, where their own lives could be eased up. So much of their own cognition, their own thoughts, their own intellects could just be focused on more spiritual matters, whilst combining the more practical matters of constructing different ornate and intricate looking elegant buildings and roads and power systems and airships and so on and so on. So that's the way I view how everything was rolled out. It was a very long-term process in the development of the civilization of Great Tartaria, obviously resulting out of the collective spiritual development of the Nordic Tartarians themselves.
so obviously the white cities connecting it to Chicago and the different world fairs.
Yes,
Now that's where it starts getting really interesting because
it does.
obviously,
Yes,
you know, there is no doubt. Well, I say no doubt. There is always a possibility that these buildings could have been built, but
yes,
obviously there's no evidence to show, pure evidence to show that they weren't built.
yes.
But these world fairs, what was going on in that time period in the world fairs? Because obviously we're crossing over into the 1900s where we had World War One, World War Two come in as to play as well. So a huge destructive period.
Mm.
But it seems that was the. Do you think that was like the pinnacle, the ending of the white cities? That kind of
Of
the world.
course, I mean we have to remember very clearly that what was going on, during the emergence of the world fairs, we had the third mud flood reaching its pinnacle, its most destructive phase by the 7th of June, 1892. We know by the 30th of April, 1894, that much of Great Tartaria and northern Russia, as with many of its colonies across the northern hemisphere, had been either completely devastated and destroyed, or there were some remnant buildings left, such as different, urban districts of these various white cities of Tartaria. And then they were reconfigured into the development of these world fairs. So it was a way almost like of saying to human beings around planet Earth, there is a change of management and leadership and rulership taking place in a very subtle way. It wasn't done in a
But we
very
won't tell anyone.
apparent way. No, it wasn't. It wasn't pronounced on a public level that this was going to happen. It was just seen as a quiet transition, scientifically and culturally, that was going to take place, and that the various policymakers would just rather forget all about Great Tartaria. They'd rather it literally vanished from the historical timeline and became nothing but another story, as we're supposed to believe from the stories of Greek mythology, that Hyperborea in the Arctic North Polar region was nothing but a fiction, a mere fantasy tale. But of
It's
course,
mythology, Steve. That's
it's
it.
just
No, nothing
mythology.
else, mate. All right, just
Exactly,
forget
but
it.
exactly, but we know even from that aspect, the mythology is based on a story
Stories.
that's
Yeah.
based on events that really happened, going far enough back into prehistory. But anyway, that's another discussion for another day. So,
And we will cover that more. And everybody, please check out the videos we've done on the White Cities, because we have actually done a Pacific talk on that as well.
right.
I think we're going to get to this space again. We're going to get back to this, and
Yes, I think
I
so.
think obviously the transition of that is going to be what is going to be the impact for people, I believe. And
Yes.
I feel
Yes.
people should all be prepared for what's to come, because we don't need to be worried about maybe this dark monster. We need to understand that actually there's a lot of good things going to happen. We just all
Yeah,
have to understand that this transition that we're going to go through is going to actually, it's going to be the psychological impact on society that's going to
that's
affect us.
correct. Yeah.
And that's what people need to understand, that where,
I,
there
mm.
are things going to happen that are going to be so advanced and so out of our minds that we've believed. And even me and Stephen's minds, I know we're going to be blown away as well by some stuff. So there are things going to change a big
That's
time in the
right.
future, and the
I
near future
think
as well.
I totally agree with you, Zach. I think what's going to happen is the Christ consciousness or higher consciousness will re-emerge
Yeah,
spiritually and actually psychologically, and then ultimately on a governmental and psychological level. I
true.
do believe after 2034, 2035, with the inception, what could be, phrased as this new golden age or golden period, we will see the rudimentary basis of a new type of Christ consciousness or higher consciousness starting to emerge. But it would take many, many, many years after that for it to fully flourish on planet Earth. And then really it will be defined as heaven on earth for those human beings that are incarnating onto this beautiful material world that isn't. It's actually a spiritual world during those timelines, whenever that would be after 2034, 2035.
What about Vladimir Lenin? He's a very interesting man.
Well, I think as a contrast to the idea and the notion of how important the Christ consciousness or the higher consciousness is, we have to remember that the Russian revolutionary and political theorist Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, better known as Vladimir Lenin, and he was the chairman of the Council of People's Commissaries of the Soviet Union and Soviet Russia. And he was appointed on the 6th of July, 1923. So this wasn't long after the third mud flood and the total destruction of much of Great Tartarian northern Russia, where the Christ consciousness or the higher consciousness have been seen with such importance for so many generations of time. So it makes you wonder whether Vladimir Lenin had any awareness of the former existence of the civilization of Great Tartaria in northern Russia. It's certainly interesting to note, because what arose, in the Soviet Union and therefore Soviet Russia was a very atheistic, anti-spiritual political doctrine in the form of communism.
Mm.
So it's very interesting how that contrast took place, then to see a re-emergence many, many decades later of all these different forms of spiritual development and the re-emergence of the Russian Orthodox Church and therefore Russian Christianity, which is now so popular across the Russian Federation. I just thought it'd be interesting to add that in as well.
I think it's interesting as well, because communism is being taught to us in a way that it's all dark and evil, when actually there's forms of communism that can be very positive and constructive. And
Yes, in
I
its most
find that
ideal
very
state,
interesting, the
yes.
way we've been painted this picture that communism's this dark, magic or whatever, well, maybe magic behind the scenes. But yeah, I find that really intriguing.
Every political doctrine in history, when it's presented, as a form of political and metaphysical idealism, seems to be absolutely wonderful when people hear the words and the phrases and sentences and the paragraphs that are pronounced, and they think, yeah, that sounds great. And yes, in an idealistic way, communism is actually a fantastic political structure when it
Mm.
is administered in the correct fashion. But like as we've seen in the modern age or the modern period in the last, say, 150, 200 plus years, a lot of political doctrines, they don't end up, unfortunately, being idealistic. They become very complex, very convoluted, and deviated from their original intentions, shall we
And
say.
the Venus Project, I can't remember the name of the guy, but the Venus Project, that is based, apparently the guy that set that up, Jack Fresco, I think it was, he actually was a communist. So his actual way,
Interesting.
his viewpoint was like a communism. But I can't see anything bad with the Venus Project. I know a lot of people will
No.
have different viewpoints on it and different perspectives, but
Hmm.
to me,
Yes,
as a
exactly.
society, I think that could be very functional in the technological age we're in, and it could be amazing to live in a world like that. I think it could be quite incredible.
I totally agree. I think that's the Venus Project in terms of being a form of, shall we say, technocratic idealism in its
Mm.
approach to how human beings could live in the future on planet Earth is actually a very wonderful thing. There's really very little you can criticize about it.
I mean, a lot of people argue the fact of like this world we live in, it's how bad it is, and oh God, it can't be like this. But everyone loves technology. So, everyone's got their phones, even the people that are against certain aspects of the system, they've still got a phone or they use computers. So you have to understand that AI and technology is very productive for humans and actually a very good tool.
And of course, we to summarize the importance of the Christ consciousness or the higher consciousness for the Nordic Tartarians, they fully understood in a very clear and discernible manner how important it was to create a balance and stability between their own individual and collective spiritual development and the manufacturing and the usage of occult technology. That is something that does not go on in the Western world today. So, the modern technology that we use is not synchronized to the kind of individual and collective spiritual
No,
development of
it's
human.
not rhythmic to us. It needs to be
No,
it tuned into us. We're the key to it, not technology controls us. We control technology, and we ultimately
absolutely.
do, and
Yeah.
we always will,
But yeah, I agree with
and
what.
we will get to that space. So that is, that really, I'm
Yeah,
excited about it, but I'm also, I look around me and I see the world and I see how that's got to shift, and I can understand how the mindset of people has to shift. It's more that, and but
absolutely.
we
Yeah.
are going to go into a very positive, much more brighter world eventually.
Yes. I'd say
Now,
give it another 10 years or so before we enter the beginning of this new golden age or golden period. I think it's going to be after that. If things were, I think around that time and onward, where things are going to get a lot easier for humanity.
and I think everybody listening to this and everybody involved in any alternative type of information and looking at things, you're going to be part of this. So look at this new world that you want to be strong in it. Look after yourself, keep healthy, keep a good mindset, everything, keep focused on what is important, and that is your family and your loved ones, all right, and people around you. So look after each other and look after who you can, help out who you can. But Steve, there's so much to cover as always. We love talking to everybody, and we're going to be doing a lot more of these podcasts coming up. But there is a section on Tartaria in our book, a chapter. You can purchase the book Mysterious Realities on Amazon in paperback or ebook in digital form as well. Thank you, my brother. It's been
All right.
incredible as always. I really, I know I kind of can't, I don't say that lightheartedly. You really are amazing. Like the information you bring to me and to everybody on the channel is incredible. So thank you, my brother.
It's all right.
And it's bye for me.
And it's goodbye for me.